I'm 63 years old, and I've had a long time to think about what happened. Long enough that I can tell it straight now without my hands shaking. But I want to be honest with you from the start. For about 8 months, I genuinely didn't know which way this was going to go. I didn't know if I was going to lose my son, lose my home, or lose what little peace I'd built for myself in the years since his mother passed. It started on a Thursday evening in late April. I remember because I just got back from my bowling club. I go every Thursday, have done for 11 years, and I was still in my jacket when my son called. My son's name is Theo. He's 34 now, works in logistics, lives about 40 minutes from me. We've always been close. After his mom, Margaret, died 6 years ago, it was just the two of us for a while. His sister Adele lives over in Perth with her family, so it's not like she's around the corner. For a couple of years there, Theo and I would have Sunday dinners together most weeks. Nothing fancy. A roast, a beer, a bit of football on the telly. That kind of thing. So when he called that Thursday, I picked up straight away. He sounded different. Lighter. He said, "Dad, I've got something to tell you." And I thought, right, here we go. Maybe a promotion? Maybe something good. He said, "I've asked Simone to marry me." She said yes. I sat down on the end of the hallway bench. I said, "That's wonderful, mate. That's really wonderful." And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. I poured myself a small scotch that night and I thought, good. He's happy. That's what you want for your kids. Now, I'd met Simone perhaps 4 or 5 times at that point. She was pleasant enough when she wanted to be. Late 20s, worked in social media. She managed accounts for small businesses. Influencer stuff. That world I don't really understand. She had a large following on one of those platforms. Tens of thousands of people who followed her for, I think, lifestyle content. What she wore, where she ate, that kind of thing. The first time I'd noticed something a bit off was at Theo's birthday dinner the year before. We were at a restaurant, nice place, nothing extravagant, and Simone had asked the waiter 3 times to move tables because the lighting wasn't right. For photos, she spent a good portion of the meal on her phone, taking pictures of the food before anyone could touch it, angling things just so. Theo didn't seem to mind, or he'd learned not to show it. I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't my place. But after the engagement, things moved quickly. And that's when I started to see the shape of something I didn't much like. Theo called me about 2 weeks after the engagement to let me know they were thinking about a proposal celebration. Not the wedding, mind you, just a celebration of the engagement at a rooftop venue in the city. Simone wanted to document it for her followers. A proper shoot, a photographer, catering, fairy lights, the whole thing. He mentioned a figure. I won't say exactly what it was, but it was more than I paid for my first car. I said, "Theo, have you already proposed? Like, officially?" He said yes. He'd proposed at home. Just the two of them. A ring he'd chosen himself. His grandmother's ring. Actually, Margaret's mother's ring, which I'd kept in a box in my bedroom drawer for years. I'd given it to Theo when he told me he was thinking of proposing. It wasn't a flashy ring. Small diamond, gold band, simple. But it had been in our family for 60 years. He told me Simone had said yes in the moment. She'd been happy. But the next day, she'd raised the idea of an official proposal, one that could be filmed and shared. She felt the private proposal didn't give her anything she could post. She wanted something that matched what her followers expected. I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I said, "And the ring?" There was a pause. He said Simone had mentioned the ring was a bit plain for what she'd envisioned. She'd seen something she liked at a jeweler. A larger stone, a different setting altogether. She hadn't asked him to replace it yet, she'd just brought it up. I told him I thought he should think carefully before he spent money he didn't have on a ring to replace one that had belonged to his grandmother. I told him Margaret had worn that ring for 41 years. He said he knew. He said he was still thinking about it. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. What I want to be clear about is that I didn't go charging in. I know my place. He's a grown man. I'm his father, not his keeper. So I waited. I let a few weeks pass. I had him over for dinner one Sunday and I didn't bring it up. We watched the footy. I asked about his work. Normal. But I kept hearing things through Adele, who was talking to Theo regularly. According to Adele, the engagement celebration was still being planned. Simone had hired a photographer. She was working with a florist. She had a vision board, an actual vision board for the proposal redo. And Theo had looked at the ring Simone liked. It was $4,000. $4,000. He earns a decent wage, my son, but he'd only just finished paying off his car. He didn't have $4,000 sitting around, not without putting it on a card. Adele rang me one night, quietly worried. She said, "Dad, I don't think this is right. I don't think any of this is right." I said, "No, love. I don't, either." But we still didn't know how bad it was going to get. The engagement celebration happened in June. I wasn't invited, which I'll admit stung a little, though I understood it was a younger crowd, her friends, her world. But Theo sent me a photo from that night. He was standing in front of a floral arch, down on one knee, ring box open. Simone was in a white dress. There were probably 40 people there. It looked like a magazine shoot. Theo was smiling in the photo, but it wasn't his real smile. I've known that boy's real smile since he was born. That wasn't it. The ring in the photo wasn't Margaret's ring. I rang him the next day. He told me he'd bought the new ring. He said it was fine. He'd figure out the money. It was worth it to see her happy. I asked what had happened to his grandmother's ring. He said he still had it. It was in a drawer. I said, "Okay," and I let it go again. But something had settled in my chest by then. A kind of low-level dread that wouldn't shift. The wedding planning started in August. And that's when it genuinely began to come apart. Simone had a vision for the wedding that I can only describe as grand. A destination wedding, overseas, 120 guests, minimum, a 3-piece band, a videography team, a drone. She'd found a venue that charged more per head than I'd spent on my entire mortgage repayment the previous year. She was talking to Theo about loans. Not a small personal loan. A significant sum. The kind that would take years to repay. Theo started going quiet on our Sunday calls. Not evasive, just quieter. Shorter answers. I could hear the strain in him. It came to a head in September. I was over at his flat for what I thought was just a regular dinner. And when I arrived, Simone was already upset about something. She and Theo had clearly been arguing before I got there. She was pleasant enough with me on the surface, but there was a tension in the room you could have cut with a knife. After dinner, Theo walked me out to my car. We stood in the car park for a while. He said, quietly, that Simone had told him the wedding budget he'd proposed, which was already stretched well beyond what he was comfortable with, wasn't enough. She had a specific number in mind. He told me what it was. I kept my face neutral. Then he said the thing that really hit me. He said she'd told him that if the wedding wasn't the kind of event that would do well on her platform, she didn't see the point in a big ceremony at all. That it needed to be something her followers would engage with. That his contribution to the relationship was partly reflected in what he was willing to invest in moments like this. I looked at my son standing there in a car park at 9:30 at night, shoulders up around his ears, looking like he hadn't slept properly in weeks, and I thought, right. That's enough of that. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just said, "Theo, do you want to get married? Or do you want to be content for someone's feed?" He didn't answer straight away. But the question sat there between us. I drove home and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat at Margaret's old writing desk. I kept it in the study. I've never been able to move it. And I wrote out my thoughts. Not a letter to him. Just for myself. I wrote down what I'd seen since April, the timeline of it, the pattern of it. And when I looked at what I'd written, it was very clear. Every time Theo had set a limit on cost, on logistics, on what was reasonable, the limit had been moved. Every time he'd tried to anchor something in what was practical, the anchor had been lifted. The proposal had been redone. The ring had been replaced. And now the wedding budget was being inflated beyond what he could service without serious financial stress, based on what would perform online. I'm not a man who moves quickly. Ask anyone who knows me. But I decided that week that I was going to speak to Theo directly and plainly. And I was going to say what I saw. We had lunch the following Saturday. Just the two of us. At the cafe near his work. I ordered a flat white. And I waited until the food came. And then I said it. I told him that from the outside, what I'd watched over the past 5 months looked less like a partnership and more like a transaction. That every significant decision about their future, the proposal, the ring, the wedding, had been shaped primarily by what would generate content for her platform. That I wasn't saying Simone was a bad person, but I was saying that what I saw happening wasn't fair to him. I said, "You gave her your grandmother's ring, and she asked for a different one. You proposed privately, and she asked you to do it again, publicly. You set a wedding budget you could actually afford, and she told you it wasn't enough because it wouldn't look right online. At what point, mate, does what you want count for something?" He sat there for a long time looking at his food. Then he said, "She does love me, Dad." I said, "I believe she does. And I also believe that love isn't meant to cost you yourself." He didn't say much after that. We finished lunch, gave each other a hug, and he drove off. I wasn't sure I'd gotten through. I went home, and I told myself I'd done what I could. 3 days later, he called me. It was a Tuesday afternoon. He said, "Can you come over?" When I got there, Simone wasn't home. Theo sat me down at the kitchen table, and he said he'd had a conversation with her. A real one. He'd laid out what he could actually afford for a wedding, not what she'd envisioned, but what was real, and he'd told her the drone and the destination venue and the videography package weren't happening. He'd told her the wedding could be beautiful on a budget that didn't set them back for the next decade. He said he'd told her that if she couldn't see a future with him that didn't involve a certain level of public documentation, he needed to know that now. He said her response had been to get very quiet and then say she needed time to think. He said, "I think she might leave, Dad." I said, "That would tell you something." He nodded. He looked exhausted. But there was something different in his face. Something steadier than I'd seen in months. What happened next? I'll be honest. I wasn't fully prepared for. Simone didn't leave quietly. Over the following week, she posted about it. Vague at first, the kind of posts people who know you can read like a map, while strangers see only general sentiment. Things about being unsupported and not being valued for your vision. Her followers, who numbered somewhere around 60,000 at that point, responded. There were comments. There was sympathy. There were people tagging her with heart emojis and telling her she deserved better. Theo rang me. Angry in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. He said, "She's making me look like the bad guy online. And she hasn't even officially called off the engagement." I said, "Don't engage with it online. Don't say a word on any platform. Just let it sit." He said, "It's embarrassing, Dad. People I know are seeing this." I said, "I know. But responding publicly will make it worse. Document what you can privately. Keep records of the real conversations. Don't fire back." He trusted me on that. He stayed off the platforms. What happened over the next 2 weeks was something I didn't orchestrate, but I'm glad occurred. Theo's closest friend from university, a bloke named Crispin, who'd known Simone almost as long as Theo had reached out to him. Crispin had been watching the posts too. And he told Theo that Simone had been sharing a version of events in their mutual friend group that was quite different from what Theo was experiencing. He said she'd told several people that Theo had been dismissive of her career goals, meaning the platform, and that he'd refused to support her work. The friends who heard this, to their credit, mostly came back to Theo. One by one over that week, people who'd received Simone's version reached out to Theo and said, essentially, that they'd heard both sides now, and they were with him. It was her own circle. Not mine. Not engineered. Just people who knew them both, and could see the difference between what had been said and what was real. I rang Adele that week, and I told her what was happening. She said, "Dad," she overplayed it. "I think that's exactly right." 2 weeks after Theo had the conversation about the wedding budget, Simone returned the ring. The new one. The $4,000 one. She did it formally, in a message, saying the engagement was over and she wished him well. She was gracious in the message, which I'll give her. There was no further post about it. No public announcement. She just went quiet on the whole thing. Theo called me when it happened. He was composed. A little hollow sounding. The way you are when something you hoped would be different has finally confirmed what you already knew, he said. It's done. I said. I know this hurts. He said. Yeah, but I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay. He asked me something then that I've thought about often since. He said, do you think she ever really saw me? Like, me, not the content opportunity. I said I didn't know. I said I thought, probably. She cared in her own way. But I also said that sometimes people can genuinely care about someone and still relate to them primarily in terms of what that person provides or enables. And that's a different thing from truly seeing someone. I told him those two things can exist at the same time. And it doesn't make the loss less real. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, thanks, Dad. I went home that night and I sat at Margaret's desk again. I thought about the ring, the original one, the small diamond with the gold band. 60 years in our family. I thought about the fact that it had sat in Theo's drawer for months while all of this unfolded. I asked him about it the following Sunday. He got up from the table and came back with the box and set it in front of me. I opened it. It was exactly as it should be, untouched. I gave it back to him. I said, keep this, for when you're ready, for someone who knows what it means. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it carefully back in the box. I want to tell you where things stand now because I think it matters. That was about 14 months ago. Theo is doing well. He's been putting money aside not toward a debt, not toward someone else's vision, but toward his own life. He bought a kayak. He goes out on the water most weekends when the weather cooperates. He looks, honestly, like himself again. He's been on a few dates. Nothing serious yet. He's not rushing. Adele and her family came over for Christmas, and the three of us had dinner here, at my place, with enough food for twice as many people and football on in the background. Theo laughed properly that night. The real laugh. And I thought, right, there it is. I'm telling this story because I've had a long time to sit with it. And I think there are things worth saying plainly. First, if someone who claims to love you consistently moves the goalposts on what your love is supposed to look like, that's not a standards issue. That's a control issue. And it's worth asking yourself, at what point did their needs stop being requests and start being conditions? Second, a relationship is not a content strategy. I know that sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but we live in a time when the line between private life and public performance has become genuinely blurry for a lot of young people, and I think some of them genuinely can't tell the difference anymore. When your joy needs an audience to be real, that's something to pay attention to. Third, and this is the one I think about most, dignity is not stubbornness. Theo stood his ground not because he was rigid or unromantic or unwilling to put in effort. He stood his ground because there was a point at which giving more would have required him to give himself up. And that line is worth finding. It's worth knowing where it is before you've already crossed it. I'm 63. I've been a husband, and I've been a widower. I've watched my kids grow up, and I've watched them make choices good and not so good. And I've learned that the most useful thing I can do as a father is not to fix things for them, but to say clearly what I see, and then trust them to decide. Theo decided right in the end. I'm proud of him for that. Margaret would have been proud of him too. I've thought about this a lot over the past year or so, about what actually happened underneath all the noise of it. And I keep coming back to something simple. Actions accumulate. Every small surrender Theo made the reproposal. The new ring. The inflated budget wasn't just a single concession. Each one made the next demand easier to arrive at. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. And patterns, if you don't name them, just keep running. What strikes me most about Theo's situation is that nothing that happened was dramatic in isolation. A fiancé wanting a nicer ring that's not monstrous. A woman wanting her wedding to feel special, that's not unreasonable. But there's a difference between wanting something and constructing a situation where the other person's love is only ever demonstrated through escalating cost and public performance. One is a preference. The other is a test that can never be passed. Theo is not a passive man. He's thoughtful. He's steady. And he loves deeply. But he spent months interpreting every demand as a problem he could solve if he just tried harder, spent more, gave more. That's what good people do when they care. They keep looking for the version of themselves that will finally be enough. The difficult truth is that when someone keeps moving the line, there is no version of you that will be enough, because the line isn't about you. The moment Theo stopped trying to meet the next condition and started asking whether the conditions themselves were fair, that was the moment things changed. Not because he became hard or cold or unwilling, but because he found the difference between being generous and being consumed. That distinction matters. Generosity comes from strength. Being consumed comes from fear, fear of losing someone, fear of not being enough, fear of what it means if you say no and they leave anyway. When Simone returned the ring and went quiet, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something more like relief and a kind of sadness, because I think she probably did care about Theo in her own way. I think she genuinely couldn't see what she was doing. That's the thing about living inside a performance after a while. You stop being able to tell the difference between what's real and what's content. And that's a loss too, even if it's a loss of a different kind. What I want to say to anyone watching this who sees themselves in Theo's position is this. Your steadiness is not a flaw. Your practicality is not a lack of romance. A person who genuinely loves you will not require you to dismantle your financial security, replace your grandmother's ring, and reproduce your most private moments for a public audience in order to prove yourself worthy. Love that keeps requiring more proof isn't love that's deepening. It's love that's shrinking you. And to the fathers and mothers watching, say what you see. Not to control, not to intervene, but to name the thing clearly, once, with kindness. That's all I did. I told Theo what I observed, I let him sit with it, and I trusted him to decide. He decided right. He didn't need me to fix it. He just needed someone to say plainly, "This isn't right." And you know it. He's got his grandmother's ring still. In a box, in a drawer, waiting for the right time. I think about that sometimes, and it steadies me.